everyone. Welcome back to Procrastinate with Books. Today with you I have another one of the most requested videos that was getting in the comments, and so I bring to you one of the best recommendations for the beginners into the reading arena. This whole video will be divided into two major parts, I would say, depending upon the length of the books. The first half would be mostly around 100 or less pages of books that I personally feel a beginner should read to start or kick off their reading journey. And then there are some additional most recommended books that I found pretty helpful, and I would like to share them with you as well. These books, however, would be of a little longer duration or pages, that would be 200 pages, 300 pages, or something of that sort of a range. But they are pretty great and have an engaging storyline, so I think you would really like it. So, without any further ado, let's quickly jump in. First on the list is my personal favorite, Animal Farm by George Orwell. This is one of the most recommended books by him. He has written many other books like 1984 as well, but this is one of the most impactful book. So if you are looking at a book that actually conveys some additional message apart from just the basic story, I think this is a good place for you to start in, because the overall setup of the story is in such a format that it gives metaphorical messages throughout the book, especially because of its plot. Story starts on an animal farm where the person who takes care of this farm actually gets drunk and forgets to feed the livestock living in there, and there the whole revolution starts amongst the animals under the leaderships of the pigs living in there, who try to create another society, and the whole civilization aspect of it by creating different barriers, rules, timetables, sorts of things, who should do what kind of activities, and creating different subdivisions of works and assigning things to people, not exactly people, animals in this case. And that whole aspect and scenario is being compared to the human civilization and its evolution, how things actually started at the beginning and later on they just did not make any sense as one after the another rules were added, and that whole catastrophe is being compared to our current life change. Next on the list is Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway, another important book that conveys a strong message through its short and sweet, simple story. And the story is basically about a young boy, an old man, and them going to the sea to catch a very giant fish. And anything beyond this would be considered spoilers, so I'll let you read this book. The only things I would like you to keep in mind is that there are a lot of underlying hidden meanings in the story, and there are metaphorical examples set in based on the struggles of real life and the struggles they were actually facing while catching this fish. So they are both compared, and I think you will like the comparison to the real life. Actually, I feel people ninth or 10th standard and above would be able to enjoy this much better, because they'll be understanding a lot of hidden aspects and implications of the story. So do give it a try if you feel this one works out in your genre. Next on our list is The Sea Prayer by Khalid Hosseini. This is actually an illustrated edition, the one that I read at least was, and it's quite short work by this author. Usually he writes very long books. The story here is about a father writing a letter to his son, and that's on the eve of his journey, where before actually leaving for the journey he's having second thoughts when he's looking at his son sleeping peacefully, and he's thinking about the dangers of the sea voyage that he's about to have and what implications it would have in case something happens to him in the journey, and he's just worried about the well-being of his son and so on. It's an emotional ride, and if you do like some implications around war zone, Syria, or any such emotional build-up between family ties and bondings, and you want to explore that, I think this would be the one for you before actually diving deeper into this author's other work, which are all emotionally very drenching. My next recommendation for you is Who Moved by Cheese by Spencer Johnson, and I think this would be loved by anyone who loves fiction or non-fiction both, and it actually carries a nice story and a nice messaging from that story, which I find pretty interesting from a short take that this book has. The book is actually trying to help you understand how to deal with changes in life by the tale of mice who are basically hunting for cheese, and how they discover it, then they lose it, and what they do beyond that. Those all things are explained in the book, and how you actually cope up with those things. And we as a humans, how we actually get so habituated to the things around us that we are not very fond of changes. And in case changes come into our life, how do we actually deal with them? That is what all is discussed about in this book. Next book, Death in the Venice by Thomas Mann, is a very audience specific story. And I would like to give you the disclaimer that you may either love it or you may either hate it. There is no in between with this book. The story in the book is about a very successful but aging writer who actually has a thing for wanderlust, and following that he ends up being in Venice, and he basically wanted to be there to quench his spiritual fulfillment, but that does not happen. Instead, what happens is his erotic doom, making the whole story about passion for one's life and the decisions that are wise or unwise that you eventually take in your life, and how they're basically responsible for how things take a turn and how destiny ends up being configured. I would say that's what the story here is about. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens is actually one of the children's fiction that has been adapted into multiple levels of movies as well. So if you cannot feature your time to the book directly, go watch a movie and then read the book. It's pretty short and concise. I'm sure you will love it. The reason I'm recommending it both to adults and to children is because the message of the book that it's trying to convey out in the world is actually more representative to our adult life. That's because it's actually asking you to be more thankful and appreciative towards the things that you achieve in life, and whatever you have and whatever you are given in life, be more appreciative towards it. That's the whole message of the book. And I think adults tend to forget that a lot. Children are really happy with even small things in their life. Story starts with a grumpy old miser person who is not thankful to anything and is not good to anyone, basically a very mean person. And he, on the eve of Christmas night, he actually gets visited by a ghost who is none other than her former business partner. And he actually gives him a kind of an ultimatum that if you don't improve your behavior, this is what your life would be. And that glimpse of things actually changes everything in that person. And finally, the grumpy old man understands that a loss or an end is what it actually takes for us to value what we currently have. My next book in here, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, is for the people who actually have a hint of philosophy in their personality and would actually like to read some dripped down concentrated version of the whole wisdom of the world. I think this would be the book for you. It's actually just a compilation of a lot of thoughts that this philosopher had. Also is recommended that you read maybe one thought a day or just one page a day, and I think you'd be quite satisfied with self. Another great thing that this book does is give you a very good idea of captions that you could probably use to post your pictures or status that you usually upload, and you just keep going and looking out for different quotations. I think this one has a really great one, especially related to one's life, and it's also eye opener to read this book. Another great thing that I found is if you actually like Ikigai, you would love this, because Ikigai to me felt like a watered down version of this book and many other books that are currently there. I think they have just adapted a lot of concepts from this book. So if you have read any of those, you should probably give this a try. And now, for my light readers who don't want anything philosophical, metaphorical, or any of those categories that goes on, blah blah, this, that, heavy stuff basically. This one was a very hard find, but I do have something that you would just enjoy reading and have absolute no sense later. You don't have to think a lot about it, look into the hidden depths, meaning, and that is none other than a light, cozy murder mystery. Murder in the Muse is a Hercule Poirot story by Agatha Christie, and I should warn you that this one is one of those Agatha Christie books where Hercule Poirot comes into the picture, investigates the whole scenario. And let me tell you, if you have ever heard about Agatha Christie books, they are all murder mysteries, and sadly, not all of them fall under 100 pages. So, hunting this one down to the number of pages so that it matches the concept was pretty hard for me, but I did it for you guys, so I hope you appreciate that. Talking about the story of this book, a woman is found dead in the locker room. The police investigates into the picture and then they feel that it could probably be a suicide. However, when Hercule Poirot looks at it, he understands that this is probably a murder and not a suicide. Now we have officially made it to the second part of the video where I have some more recommendations for you that don't fall under the category of 100 pages or less, but they are definitely worth the read, and if you can invest your time, they are slightly longer from 100 pages but not very long. None of them are beyond 500 pages, I would say. They are definitely worth your time, so do give them a try and let's tune in further. First on our list is Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, which is one of the most recommended books across the world. It's also considered one of those modern classics book that would eventually turn into a full classic section. And the story here is about a boy who has this wanderlust in his heart and decides to travel the world and seek its wisdom and follow the path that destiny actually puts in front of him. He does some daring and goes ahead with the flow, and then there's a lot of learning coming across his way, and there are lot of instances and stories that are being told in metaphorical format that you have to understand, but the author does a really great job of conveying it in a simpler language as well, and that's why this book is best for readers, especially who are in the beginners category. My next recommendation for my beginners is Rich Dad Poor Dad. You might have seen this across being suggested by a lot of financial institutions and those financial pages that bring up pop-up shorts for you financial advice. I think they are right, and hopefully so am I, because you know my disappointment in the Indian educational system or education system across the globe. Nobody really teaches you these basic fact that I think should be educated to children right from a very early age and not be waited up until 11th or 12th when someone actually opts for commerce and then you are giving them some basic financial knowledge. I think this is something that is a must have, just like the culinary schools that actually teach you how to eat, how to sleep, you know, how to be polite, you know, all the good manners to behave in a society. You should also know how to manage your finances pretty basic well. And that's why I think the people in different backgrounds should very much read this book. It's very important. It's also educative enough, and the way this book actually tells you the whole concept into a story format of two young boys living in different financial conditions at their homes, and how they grow up to be, what is their mindset, and how the two different dads teach two very different things to their sons. That is what actually being conveyed to you, and how you actually learn to manage money from money. My next recommendation for you is The Kite Runner by Khalid Hosseini, which is the story about a young boy who was living in Afghanistan, and then the whole war scenario, terrorism, and all those things came into the picture, and how he basically fled the country, moved out into a different American society, settled in there, what happened between that time, how was his childhood, and then sweeping back and coming back to the country to check out what's left of the home country and how things are actually taking place and making those connections back to the current age. That's what this book is discussing, and it's a very emotional ride, so keep your tissues close. This one did not make me tear up, but the other book by this author, A Thousand Splendid Suns, that one definitely did. So I would still suggest you to keep your tissue box pretty handy. And the writing style of this book is also very unique in its own way. The way the author describes the events of his life, it would feel that you are there being brought along with him. And the whole carry along experience is really interesting to read and experience while reading as well. So, if you have any other qualms about this book, let me know in the comments. I would like to address them specially because this is one of my lifetime favorite books ever, and I think this is what got me into the emotional side of books as well, and correlating with that experience, this is where it all began. Next recommendation for you is The Palace of Illusions by Chitra Banerjee, and this is for my lovers of Indian mythology. If you really like Mahabharata, Ramayana, and those books, and you want a twisted take or a separate author's take on those stories and reinventing those basic stories that we have been growing up with, I think you should read this book. This book is basically narrated from Draupadi or Panchali's point of view and how her life basically was from the time she was brought up, who was her friend, foe, everybody, how motherhood was to her. And there's also a twisted angle that you don't actually see in Mahabharata, where the author has actually pinched in her own point of view and shown a little bit of pull between her and Karn and what chemistries they could be diving into. So, if you don't mind a bit of tweaking with your historical stories, I would say, then you can give this a try. But I would just suggest read this with a very open mind. My next book for you is The Book Thief, which is actually the story about a young girl who's living with her foster parents in the scenario of World War II in Nazi Germany, where they basically got nothing to do with the books. They, even if they catch a sight of a book, they would probably burn it. And growing up in those conditions is this young girl who is so fond of reading books that she would probably even risk her life to get just a glimpse of a book or get hold of a book. The book actually reminds me a lot about The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, which was a great story also adapted into a movie. But the thing is, when I was a younger version of myself and I was reading many other books, I was still not interested in reading that book. So I don't really think a beginner would be able to correlate that, and that's why I've skipped that apart. Now, when I have read hundreds of books, I probably appreciate that book and its version a lot. But as a beginner, I understand that we just want an interesting book that will actually give you a hold on the reading aspect in your life, and that's what you're looking for. And that's why I've instead suggested The Book Thief. And now, coming to my final recommendation about a book that actually not just got me hooked up into reading, but also made me a fantastic fantasy fan altogether for, I think, forever and ever and ever. I'm talking about the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. Majorly the 1 to 7 books in the series, not the 8th part. It is more of a whatever it is, nevertheless, we don't need to talk about it. I'm talking about these 7 books that you need to read. Most of you might have already seen the movies, and I would still ask you to read these books. They have a very different experience there, and I feel that these books help you cultivate your imagination in a way better format because the writing style is obviously very great in these books, and it will enhance your reading to visualization imaginary ratio as well, because simply reading something and being able to visualize is not a skill that everybody comes across very often. So it will help you cultivate that skill as well, and going forward then you will be more appreciative towards other books as well, because you might have already seen the movie, so you know what to visualize when you read those texts, and you might have a picture in mind, and that will just correlate better, and I think it will work really great. I really don't have to tell you what the story is about, because literally everyone on the planet knows what Harry Potter and Potterheads are about. I can do a separate video if you want about being a Potterhead. And that, my book lovers, were all the recommendations I had today for the beginners level. And before closing this video any further, I actually wanted to talk to you about something. I had a set of recommendations that were given to me when I was starting to read, and sadly, some of them did not work for me. I do have a list of those books, and if you want, we can cover them in our next video as well, specifically talking about books that did not work for me as a new reader. And that's it. Let me know in the comments down below if you want me to do that. I'll be happy to pick it up. And until my next video, keep your coffee strong and your TBRs long. Goodbye.